Okay, thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the report into human trafficking and modern day slavery, and obviously this particular meeting is themed around the safeguarding of vulnerable people, and we know that those that perpetrate human trafficking, modern day slavery do target some of the most vulnerable people in society, whether that's in this country or abroad. So the covering report just sets out some of the work through my office, and I've taken a particular lead on this as a Police and Crime Commissioner in helping to establish not only a West Yorkshire network but also a national Police and Crime Commissioners network around modern day slavery, human trafficking, and of course allocated some resources to establish a dedicated West Yorkshire Police unit, and at that point I'd just like to hand over and perhaps just ask you to introduce yourself as well, please. Warren, thank you.
Yes, it's Warren Stevenson, Commissioner, as you know, Detective Chief Inspector from Protected Services Crime, and lead the human trafficking team that was established, as you've outlined, within Protected Services Crime. The report itself is really looking at the safeguarding of people, especially since the Modern Day Slavery Act has come into being, and the work that we've been doing around that, which has been driven by the Prime Minister's task force as well, and the speech that she gave on the 31st of July last year. West Yorkshire Police already had and continue to acknowledge modern day slavery is a significant threat facing the police in this region, with sexual exploitation, inclusive of child sexual exploitation, remaining the most prevalent within West Yorkshire, closely followed by forced labour, which you'll have seen from some of the results at court recently. The work to date, especially around the anti-trafficking network, we outline around the partners that we have brought to the table around the anti-slavery network that is helped through your office to run and make sure that we get those people around the table to work together. And I'm not going to go through all those, but it is a wide-ranging list of partners from a variety of backgrounds, including non-government organisations that come to help around the work that we need to do in this area of work. As you've outlined, the victims of this crime are very vulnerable, and they require the support and long-term support, and it cannot just be that of the police to do that, because of the very special needs of quite a few of these people. So the anti-trafficking network really assists to provide that platform for that support, alongside the specially trained staff that look after the victims as they are identified, which has shown an increase yet again, and also an increase in the amount of crimes that we're having under the modern slavery legislation, which has seen a rise of 126% year on year, 2015 to 2016. But I should put a caveat to it, because we have the 21% of those crimes are out of force crimes because of the relationship we have with immigration crime that's based down at Waterside Court, and the crimes that are reported through that mechanism there. But that said, it still shows an increase in crimes occurring within West Yorkshire, and therefore the number of victims that have been found and have been looked after throughout that year compared to 2015. We've talked about CSE generating most modern slavery crimes, with 37% of those offences being recorded. And that's due to the work that we now look at, and I'm sure you've heard previously from the CSE work that's ongoing and some of the legacy offences around that area of work. But it's also that the Modern Slavery Act gives us the potential to look at dealing with offenders, and therefore protecting the victims using that legislation, because there are some circumstances where it is more beneficial to deal with it in that form. Once you take CSE from there, we talk about forced labour, which is looking really for us around construction and property maintenance, and it is the most predominant form there. But after that, there's cannabis cultivation, which provides its own unique kind of victim, where they're actually committing crime on the face of it, but actually being forced into doing so, and sometimes in some hellish conditions, and where they're working as a gardener cultivating cannabis for very little or no pay. And then looking at different things along car washes, restaurants and takeaway businesses. And prior to 2016 we hadn't had that kind of reporting, so it does show that the network is trying to get into these hard to reach places to get people to report these kind of crimes to us. There is a victim profile on there which I think is important to highlight, which is 36% of the victims are from the UK, so it's not brought into these shores, and 36% of those victims are from within the UK, the majority of which are around child sexual exploitation and abuse. And 82% of all those victims are from within the European Union, which is mainly from the Polish region at this moment, but also Romania. And explains the types that come from. Non-EE victims tend to be used in domestic servitude or cannabis farms. And at this moment in time there are 14 live human trafficking operations and 81 live crimes within West Yorkshire that are being investigated. Looking at the responders and the reporting into the referral mechanism, there was 100 direct reports from West Yorkshire Police themselves identified by West Yorkshire Police, and 107 from other first responders or law enforcement agencies. And you'll have seen in Operation Nosemay that's been in the papers, we've seen a term of imprisonment which has also had a prevention order attached to it for 10 years, which also allows us to work with our colleagues in Poland to enforce these orders when that offender is deported at the end of their prison sentence. I should point out at this moment in time that there is an appeal ongoing against the sentence. I can say no more on that, but I won't go into the prison sentence at this particular time. I think I've touched on quite a bit around the national referral mechanism and the increase, and by default there will be an increase in the number of referrals because of the amount we've got going on. And according to the Gangmasters licensing analysis of forced labour, the majority of suspects are aged between 26 to 35, but the West Yorkshire profile is slightly different, and we seem to have an older generation of suspects, mainly 30 to 39. And the peak age is around 33 for ourselves, and it's something that we just need to look at when we're trying to reconcile who is actually the gangmasters that are pushing these into forced labour and which are the actual victims, and how they get the initial contact, which seems to be online adverts at the moment, or in direct contact in homeless shelters or soup kitchens, whether in this country or in their host country. And most of the victims appear to know the suspect in some way or another, whether it be through family ties. And the HMIC inspection commented on the positive work of the anti-trafficking network and also the work that the force has been doing in relation to modern slavery. And I've detailed in this report, and I didn't know whether you want me to go through, but the future direction, including partners, Commissioner.
Perhaps we might cover that in some of the questioning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Right. Thank you, Warren. Yeah. Well, just firstly to say that well done in terms of the work that's already been undertaken to everybody in West Yorkshire Police. We have taken a national lead, and I know how well regarded the work that you're doing with our partners is being received at the national level. So thank you very much for the excellent work that's already been undertaken. I needed to say that from the outset. Within the report, obviously, there is an attached report from my office that again goes into detail around some of the initiatives and work that I've been undertaking with yourselves, but also with other police and crime commissioners and the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, and broadly reflect some of the things you have talked about. But I also just needed to mention, of course, the success around the police transformation fund, which will see an additional 8.5 million being put into regional coordinators throughout the country to look at the intelligence assessments and to assist here in this region and all other regions. And I was pleased to be able to play a role in influencing the outcome of that bid, which is, you know, clearly good news from a resourcing point of view. And just put on record, thanks to my staff at the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner around all the excellent work that they're doing as well to assist me in playing that role. In terms of questions, so you've referred, Warren, to the National Referral Mechanism, and as we know, this is currently being reviewed. West Yorkshire is part of that review. Are you satisfied that enough measures are being put in place to adequately address and close the current gaps in intelligence to reflect the true picture of the scale and threat of modern slavery in West Yorkshire?
I believe that the implementation of revised policy, together with the work that with the NCA and the fact that the NCA now share data with us so that we can understand the true picture, so that as working together we can actually work out where our victims and suspects are and provide that support and network to them, whether it be by the police or other agencies. And I've already mentioned that I believe the victim care, actually the longer term, is best provided by other NGOs and those non-government organisations that can provide that. And I think we're now starting to get a more complete picture, and more needs to be done, but I think we've done an awful lot of work around raising that awareness both internally within West Yorkshire Police and externally with our partners through the anti-trafficking network that's been going on. And also we're now bringing online the post of the new training and partnership officer that will work alongside the human trafficking team to continue that relentless drive to help people's understanding and make sure that we get into the harder to reach communities and get the training. And as you know from the university social justice lecture that we spoke about, and we got the question and answer around that work, just being by going out into the community in those kind of forums, we're able to reach some harder and more vulnerable people and touch into those and provide support to them and training so they can identify victims sooner and work alongside those victims. So I think that kind of work will only enhance this now.
So you just mentioned there around the role of non-governmental organisations, and as you know, we do work very closely with Hope for Justice amongst others in West Yorkshire. I guess one of the things is as this area of work grows and the intelligence grows, what more can we do to sort of galvanise that NGO sector, if you like, around the role that they will, in my view, increasingly need to play around the support, particularly of victims in modern slavery?
I think working alongside the work that we did for the businesses around the modern slavery when it came online, I think looking at those kind of events to raise the profile and to bring them in to see what they can offer and what we can offer to them, and to attract those that perhaps haven't come to the anti-trafficking network is an area of business that we ourselves can develop, and I think that kind of event alongside the business kind of event that we put on will raise that, and to continue to do that across a more Yorkshire and Humber region because the impact from outside into West Yorkshire, as you know, the ports of entry as somebody pointed out when they asked me to do something around the maritime agency, I did point out we're a landlocked county and one of the few kind of things, so I struggle. But as an end user, as that aside, we will have those kind of people that either enable it or actually utilise it, so we can do work around those. So I think that wider thought process and consideration are two kind of areas I think, you know, looking forward that we will be able to deliver on with your office and ourselves.
Okay, it's just that as we know that there are increasingly a number of NGO organisations that are appearing, and it's how we sort of coordinate that. And I agree that it goes beyond the borders of West Yorkshire, because by definition it's a national and international issue that we are dealing with here.
Is this also something that, you know, what we're talking about here is that national coordination? Kevin Highland, our new Anti-Slavery Commissioner, has a key role to play here. I think you do too, Commissioner, in your role as taking lead on this on behalf of the APCC. So whilst I think it's important that we play our part, I do recognise that actually there are others as well who can help us with this.
Yeah, okay, thank you. You mentioned Operation Noseme, which, as you've said, saw the first slavery and trafficking prevention order, and we won't get into the detail given that the appeal is ongoing. But just to ask, how in West Yorkshire have you tried to utilise the tools and legislation of the Modern Slavery Act since its implementation in 2015?
I think the work of looking at risk and prevention orders is quite difficult, because it's balancing what the intelligence we can utilise in a different forum rather than the criminal court process to be able to bring about the risk orders. And that we're working alongside the Office of the Force Solicitors to be able to do that. And I think we'll see some of those coming online as well. And also alongside the prosecutions we've got coming up, there'll be further prevention orders coming into play. And working alongside the host countries like Poland and Romania that are prepared to police those, I think actually we can have an impact, because they're the kind of places, since they're one of the largest ones that are bringing the suspects and the victims across. If we can get the message out there in those host countries, then that will have an impact as well of utilising those orders.
And so I take it then that clearly you feel that these are very useful tools to have as part of the legislation. And then secondly, who is best placed to get those key messages out to, in this case, European countries where a lot of these offenders and victims are coming from?
I think, as Ma'am has already highlighted, I think you've got a large part to play, because you've taken the role as lead for the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and I think keep pushing those messages as we have done at the various events that have taken place. But also we've done work, and some of the team have been across at been invited by the UK ambassador to Bulgaria and to do work with the European countries over there, just to say we're prepared to work across and to share that information and intelligence. But again, it's to try to get a message into the non-government organisations that work over there to get to help to look after victims even when they return to the host countries and that kind of work. So we need to continue, and we've all got a part to play in that. And what about the role of Europol, for example? Have they got more of a role to play in this sort of area? At the moment, we've got two joint investigation teams that we're looking at signing up to with Europol. So they are mediating between the two police forces, if you like, whether they be in Poland or Romania and ourselves. And they're willing to work alongside ourselves to get to those. But there's a lot of work that's required just to even present it at Europol, to be able to then put to the table, say there's a joint investigation required on both sides, whether it be here or over there. But that therefore becomes self-funding in its own right. So it's the right avenue to take, because it is paid for by Europol. So I take the point, Commissioner.
Well, yeah, so the reason why I raise that is because it's right that you've taken the initiative to establish those one-to-one relationships with some of these source countries, but increasingly, in my view, Europol or even the NCA need to be sort of doing more, in my view, potentially as we go forward, because it can't be right that a lot of the resourcing and funding falls to individual forces and PCCs. There has to be a shared workload with this.
Well, I think this has been flagged up previously with the work that Sean Sawyer's leading on behalf of all chiefs, to make sure that as we get more of an understanding of what the issues are, as we start to plug some of those intelligence gaps, that we have got that coordinated response. Otherwise, you run the risk of having 43 different sets of relationships and arrangements with goodness knows how many different countries, which just wouldn't work in the most effective way. So it is important to have that central coordination.
Yeah.
And clearly that needs to be done nationally by the NCA.
Yeah, yeah, and throw into the mix Brexit, and yes, there are all sorts of implications going forward. So, but no, I think it's good that we are very aware of some of the things that may need to happen at the national level. In terms of training, could you just say a bit around how you've sort of effectively managed to deliver some consistency around training to internal staff, clearly with input from yourselves and the team?
Yeah, internally we are involved in all investigation training, so there is a consistent message on every investigation training course around modern slavery and the impact that it has. But also with the new police officers that have been brought online, we now continue to deliver that training to them, and we've developed an iLearning package which Mr Foster is looking at being mandated training anyway, which is a development tool in its own right, because it can be shared with partners, certain chapters of it, to bring that understanding of identifying victims at an early stage. So there's quite a lot of work gone into that, and when the training officer lands, we will be rolling that out across internal and external partners for training.
There's a real opportunity, just to enlighten our frontline staffs with identifying the characteristics of someone who may be a potential victim of trafficking, modern day slavery.
And in your experience, is this something that is well received amongst officers and staff? Because, as you know, for reasons we've already explained, it's in the police and crime plan. And do police officers and staff understand the sort of the wider impact of this in our communities? Because, there may be members of the community who come to me and say, well, why is human trafficking a priority within your police and crime plan? And obviously I can explain to them around the treatment of human beings and people absolutely being trafficked into different parts of our community. And from a criminality point of view, I guess it's just really getting that understanding amongst colleagues within the force that it's an insidious and pretty abhorrent crime that's been committed.
I think in the way that we didn't really understand what the picture was around child sexual exploitation 5 years ago, and officers and staff felt very vulnerable about their lack of knowledge and understanding, and particularly any signs that they could have been able to pick up and report in. I think we're experiencing the same thing now. Officers and staff want to know more about human trafficking and modern day slavery, because they are nervous about that lack of knowledge, that lack of opportunity then to be able to spot the signs. Knowing the potential that it's going on within your particular neighbourhood that you've got responsibility for, and not recognising those signs is very difficult. So I think my experience is that people are welcoming the training.
It's to engender that confidence to be able to deal with it, and then look after the victim with enough time to be able to say, I need more time to work with them to put them into a place of safety. And if you give them that confidence through the training, that's what we'll achieve.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And touched on the National Transition Programme through the funding that's going to be provided. And I guess it's that wider piece then around how we sort of get this awareness through our communities more generally in assisting them to help us in spotting and identifying where this may be happening in our communities.
I think, as Marm's already alluded to, the transformation programme really is to bring that regional coordinator and analysts working alongside them to bring the best practice, what works, what we understand, what we see at a national level through to what's happening regionally, and then really distill it down for the communities and how that works. And I've already talked about doing work at the airports. Well, there's one at Doncaster. It's only across the border from ourselves, but we have Leeds and Bradford, and then we've got the ports coming in through Hull or up in Newcastle, and we have to share that, what we learn there, to be able to identify those routes in and how they come through. And that's what we're picking up from the victims that talk to us, that explain how they're brought across, or somebody pays for their airfare, etc. So the transformation programme really is that kind of platform now set nationally to be able to, for us to work with, to ensure that consistent message, rather than as being slightly one of a few forces and a handful of forces that have really taken the mantle forward, and now we're trying to get that support to carry it on into it and deliver even more to the communities.
And I think just finally, given where we are here and the work that's been done, languages is clearly one of the big issues, given the different nationalities involved sometimes, notwithstanding that there is a growing number that are UK based, if you like, on the figures that have been presented. Has any work been done with some of the victims or survivors around engaging with them to get them more involved, to better understand through some of the cultural and language issues, to sort of really get underneath some of these issues?
There's several strands to that, and without taking in too much of this particular time, but there's work with academia to be able to understand not only the victims but also the suspect mentality and what brings them forward. But with the victims themselves, debriefing and that continual debriefing, and the non-government organisations do that for us even better, to allow us to be able to see where those potential weak points or points of intervention for ourselves can take place, which is one. There's also work around developing an app to go on our handheld devices to allow our frontline staff to be able to interact with them there with a series of questions that may prompt that appropriate response from a victim, without letting them become even more scared of the potential people or alpha person that's around them at that particular time. Yep. So the work with academia, the app that we need to go, the training that goes with it, and the transformation fund will all bring that together. But we have to just keep going through that, because each victim has a different story to tell us, and each victim tells it in a very different way, and it's that understanding, and that's where academia comes with us. But there's even further work around when we start looking at children and minors in particular, and at which touch points they're actually coming in or not, and we've spoken with your office in relation to this, around making sure that statutory bodies share information around, so that we can identify minors at risk of being trafficked around, so that's a large and longer term body of work that we need to do.
Yeah.
I think there's also a further opportunity that perhaps we could think about with, for as long as Hull is a city of culture this year, with a long history associated with slavery in the past, with William Wilberforce being from that part of the country, there's a really, really strong correlation, I think, to being able to talk about the past and the history under that banner, and about actually how modern day slavery is incredibly important and going on right underneath people's noses right now. I just think that there's other things that we could also do locally to try and make that connection for people who might just then start plugging those intelligence gaps that we've got.
Yeah, no, thanks, Warren. I mean, we could go on at length on this, given our sort of involvement with this, but again, thanks for the report and the updates, and clearly we will continue to do our utmost to tackle modern slavery, human trafficking, and work together with all our partners to take this forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Cheers.